All right, welcome back, everybody. So continuing with our course on design and communication, we're going to focus our lesson today on photography and photo editing. And so I've just grabbed a couple random nature pictures as well as some pictures from our Nature Discovery Center. And we're going to kind of use these to practice. You can, of course, use any picture you have on your computer, or you can just get some stock footage online that you can mess around with. So the first thing to note about pictures is, as we've discussed in other lessons, you should be aware of some kind of fundamental things. And so the first fundamental thing is that pictures in general are taken in the 4:3 aspect ratio. So that means it's basically going to be 4 wide to 3 high. Whatever the dimensions are, it'll keep that same ratio between the length and the width and the height. And so as you can see, all these pictures here are the same shape. Even this one, which is in portrait mode, is still in that same 4:3 aspect ratio. Now, sometimes some phones will default to a 16:9 or even a even stranger aspect ratio. And you might find that actually reduces the overall resolution. And so whenever possible, you want to use the maximum resolution possible. And so when you're using your phone to take photos, just make sure you go into your phone settings, whatever that phone may be, and open your camera app and make sure that the image size is set to the largest possible pixel dimensions. Now that might mean that when you're taking the picture, it's not showing up as full screen on your phone, because phones are strange aspect ratios. Phones are not 4:3, or mostly they're not even 16:9 anymore. They're even wider than that. So just make sure that you've got your phone set to the highest possible quality, because in general, the greater the resolution, the better. And so what is resolution? So resolution, as mentioned before, is a measurement of length by height. And so if you hold your mouse over any picture in Windows using Explorer, you'll actually get the dimensions right there. So for example, this one is 4,608 pixels by 3,456 pixels. Now, if you guys are becoming familiar with what these different numbers mean, you'll realize that this size is actually over 4K. So this image, this still image, is actually so high resolution that it is higher resolution than a 4K video would be. And actually, this might be surprising to people, but that's totally normal. When it comes to photography, still images are usually much larger than the images used to make video. And so you can see this one is 5,184 pixels by 3,888. These are fairly large file sizes. These are fairly large resolution images, right? Now, the resolution is usually determined by the camera. So a camera will have a maximum possible resolution based on the number of pixels that it can capture. The file size, however, obviously, larger resolution images will be larger file sizes. However, you will find that not all of your images are the same file size. The more complicated an image, the more colors, the more difference among colors, the more complex shapes and lines, the higher your file size will be. And you'll find that, professional photography cameras can take images that are 20 megabytes, 30 megabytes, 40 megabytes in size, so they can get quite large. The second thing to know is to understand the different image types. So JPEG is the one that most people are familiar with, .jpg. And just to remind everybody, if you don't see the file extensions, you go to View and make sure that File Name Extensions is checked. You always want to leave that checked, because it'll just help you keep track of the different files that you have on your computer and be able to make sure you know what's what. So you've got different versions of JPEG. These are essentially compressed images. You've also got raw image files, and that you will usually come from more professional photography cameras. And raw images are actually really great because they store a lot of information that JPEG images lose. For example, if we were to look at this image here, if you look in the sky, especially the sky behind the palm tree here, there's some parts here that are probably we're losing information. So the camera is actually just registering pure white here. There's no color information. There's no tonal information saved here. It's just 100% white. On a raw image, you would actually be able to capture much more of the information in there. And the same is true of not only whites and darks, but also colors. And so with raw images, you will be able to record the information when you take the picture and then retrieve that information through photo editing using a professional photo editing software. And so raw images are great if you need your images to be perfect, if you're doing professional photography, if you need the absolute highest quality. But for those of us working in conservation, I can safely say that using, the highest resolution, the highest quality JPEG image you can generate is almost always good enough. We are not professional photographers, and we don't really need our images to be that great. They need to be good enough, And so most smartphones today take photos that are good enough for 90% of your uses. And so if you hold your hand steady and you have a good sense of lighting and angles and framing of your shot, all of those things will help you take a good looking photo. And on that note, it's kind of hard to discuss. I am not a professional photographer at all. So it's kind of hard to discuss framing and such within a photo, but I'll just pull up some of my photos and talk about framing in them. And so just a simple one would be, for example, this photo right here. However nice of a photo it might be, this table surface is quite distracting because it's so empty and so large. It takes up a significant portion of the entire image, and there's nothing really there to look at. And so, this image would actually have probably been nicer if it was in a portrait mode. And that's just something that is kind of, you'll have to experiment with to figure out, how to make things look nice. This is definitely something that is subjective. But you see, for me, like, this image as a square is much nicer than the image in its original aspect ratio. And that's just because of that weird big empty spot. And those are really subtle things, and it just takes practice to get them right. So what we're really going to focus on is, you've got these images, you've taken them with your phone or with whatever camera you have. How do you get the most out of them? And so there's plenty of photo editing software. You can use Picasa, Google Photos. Your phones typically will have a built-in editor on them, and all of that is fine. But for managing your photo library, Windows File Explorer is probably going to be the easiest. And also because, of course, if you're using it with Google Backup and Sync, you can have your photos and your edits automatically distributed to your entire team without having to upload and download different versions. If you haven't seen the video on Google Backup and Sync, I'll link it up in the top corner now. So what we're going to do is just to look at how you can edit these photos kind of fairly quickly, just using some built-in Windows features. And so we'll start with this one. And so we've just got this cow couple here. And when you double click on a photo in Windows, it should open in something like this. And if it doesn't, by the way, you can right click it, select open with, and you're looking for the default Photos app, this one right here. If it's not set as the default app for editing photos, you can choose between other photo editing software, or you can click choose another app, and you can actually scroll through here and possibly see more. And when you select more, you'll even be able to look for another app on this computer. So if you really are like, wait, none of those are the ones that I want to use, you can actually select on this option here, and it'll open this browser menu, and you can navigate through your program files to find the particular app that you're looking for. For me, I have it set to automatically default to open using the built-in Windows 10 photo app, because this is nice and easy. I can just scroll back and forth between my photos. And what you'll notice is that you have this little button up here in the top right. Now, unless Windows changes this with an update, typically the way you would do it is you would select this and it pops up with different options. Now, drawing, 3D effects, animated text, and creating videos or 3D painting, these are not things we're going to go through today. Really, we're focusing on just taking this photo and making it look as nice as possible. So to do that, you're going to go to Edit. Now, within Edit, you have three options. So you've got Crop and Rotate, Filter, and Adjustments. So crop and rotate is pretty self-explanatory. This is where you can adjust the crop of the image. Now, remember that if you adjust the crop of an image, you are deleting pixels from your image. So you don't want to crop too much, because your image will still be displayed the same size when people are looking at it. And so when you're deleting information off of an image by cropping it, this part in here that is being cropped, that is remaining, is not increasing in resolution. So if I was to just increase this crop eventually, you'll see that the quality is getting less and less the more I'm cropping in, because essentially all I'm doing is zooming in. The image isn't gaining any pixels, right? So just be careful when you're cropping. You don't want to crop too drastically unless the image is going to be very, very small, on a small device, or for some sort of icon or some very, very small display, in which case it won't matter so much. But just be careful about cropping too much. Another thing you can do with the crop section here is you can rotate the whole image. So if you've taken it and for some reason it's not saving in the right direction, you can do that. You can also flip the image. So if you decide, you know what, I really need my text to be on the left, so I'm going to flip the cow so he's over there on the right, you can do that. And then you can choose the aspect ratios. And this is going to be a very useful trick. So first of all, you always have the original aspect ratio. And so whatever your photo was originally taken in, it will know that. Windows will know the aspect ratio of the original photograph, and so it will display it here. It is probably going to be 4:3 if everything is normal. If you have some settings that are a bit different, it might come in as 16:9 or another aspect ratio. However, you can always reset it by just clicking original aspect ratio. Now, if I decide that I want this same 4:3 aspect ratio, but I want it to be a portrait mode, I can just click Make Portrait. And again, anything taken where the width is longer than the height is going to be considered a landscape photo, and anything where the height is taller than the width will be considered a portrait photo. So in fact, this photo will look nicer, in my opinion, as a portrait. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. That's going to be the first change that I make. However, just note that you can also do square. You can set it to other aspect ratios, and conveniently, they have 16:9 set as a optional preset. And this is an important aspect ratio, as you guys know already, for video stills, and this is kind of a standard aspect ratio used for many computer screens as well. So just bear that in mind, that is an option there. And again, you can switch back and forth. You also have the square option, which is very useful if you want to just set up little tiles for various things. I'm going to go ahead and leave it as it currently is. And you also have this straightening option. So not only can you flip it 90 degrees, but you can make these minor rotation adjustments as well. Now, one thing to bear in mind is anytime you make these rotation adjustments, it's going to automatically keep that crop within the image. That way you don't end up with like black bars in the corners, right? So it'll automatically scale the image to fit your crop. All right, I'm going to leave my crop on 0. I'm going to set my crop to the full size. Now, another interesting thing about turning this portrait is that I'm actually only losing the data over here, right? I'm only losing the left and right pixels that are grayed out here. But actually, my cow is exactly the same size because I haven't cropped, I haven't like shrunk the actual vertical height of the image. So the vertical height is staying exactly the same. So I'm done with that crop, and I'm going to move over to, you don't have to click anything down here just yet. So I'm going to move over to filters. You'll notice it retains that crop that I've done. And I will say that this is something that I almost never use. So the reason I don't use it is because I don't like the built-in Windows filters. They're just a little bit too much. I mean, some of them are okay, like Fauna seems to be okay, but some of these are really, Slate is okay if you want to go for a black and white thing, but some of these are really like intense filters, and to be honest, I don't find them to be particularly useful. Now, one good feature of this is that just like many other social media apps that let you apply a filter to it, there is an intensity slider. So you could go 100% with the intensity of your filter, or you could make it a little bit more subtle. And it'll just kind of change the look of your image. And just bear in mind, you can't apply these on top of each other. So whichever one you click, that one is applied and the other one is done. And if you click original, it brings you back to your original. So I wanted to show you that these are there. Also, there's this magical enhance your photo button, which, as far as I can tell, doesn't really do anything, so I never use it. So those are the filters. They are there. You should know that they're there in case you want to quickly do it, but I never really use these functions. It's just not my style. So I'm going to leave it on original, and I'm going to go over to adjustments here. And this is where you can do a lot of good stuff. Now, it's not as comprehensive as something like Photoshop or Adobe Lightroom, where you can do a lot more. Even Picasa and other free platforms offer more control. But again, this is about speed and efficiency of work, and this is about making things look good enough, right? So right now, this cow picture is a little bit boring, but just using the built-in Windows photo editor, I can do a lot to make it look good enough. And so what I'll point out to you is that, as usual, you have these little arrows. That means there's more options. So don't just get stuck on these 4 things. Open these panels up, and now you have a fair amount of control. So the lighting will just adjust basically the amount of lighting in an image. So you can bump the lighting or lower the lighting depending on what you want. Contrast is the difference between the light areas and the dark areas. So less contrast will be very kind of grayed out. All the colors kind of look the same. More contrast is going to be, the darks get darker, the lights get lighter. So I usually, and don't be afraid to be very subtle with these, right? So you can make big changes with just a few small improvements. Exposure is just how much light you're letting into the photo in total, right? So you can overexpose or underexpose the image. It's basically going to change the brightness of the photo, right? So again, you can up it or down it. It's up to you. Highlights. So now we're looking at the lightest areas of the photo. So that's going to be the area around the animal's nose, this piece of bamboo, the animal's back. Those are the highlights of the image. And so when you adjust highlights, those areas become lighter or darker. And so you'll see that the grass is kind of all a bit light, so it's getting brighter as I increase the lightness, and it gets darker as I decrease it. Now I notice if I decrease the background brightness a little bit, the highlights, the cow kind of pops out a little bit more, which I kind of like. So I might drop that down a little bit. And now shadows is going to be obviously the darker spots. So all of these dark spots in the grass, the dark spot in the backgrounds, the shadows under the cow, that's going to be in the shadows. Right? And again, so you're making the shadows lighter or making the shadows darker. So I'm going to make the shadows a little bit lighter, I think, but I'm also going to increase the contrast a bit to get more differentiation between the lights and the darks. There we go. So that's already looking a little bit better. And then this is a great feature. So this is color. And so color is just the saturation of the image. Do you want it to be kind of grayed out, almost like a black and white image? Or do you want it to be super, super like vibrant and saturated? And so you can mess around with this and decide what you like. I think for me, I'm going to go with a little bit of extra saturation, but not much. And now we have tint, warmth, clarity, and vignette. So for tint, this is something that I wouldn't mess around with too much. This will basically tint it to either green or purple. And you don't want to mess around with this too much. If you have a nice picture of a jungle, you might want to give it a bit of green, but just be a little bit careful with this. So I don't typically mess around with tint too much, but warmth is great. Warmth is something that I mess around with a lot, and this will change the color temperature of the image. So basically, if you make it gray, it'll look a little bit more like an overcast day, like a cloudy day, or you can make it look like a cooler day. And if you go warmer, it becomes like this very hot looking, but also warm feeling look. So for me, I tend to add a little bit of warmth to all of my photos, just because I like the look of warm colored photos rather than cool colored photos. But that is very much a personal preference matter. The only thing I can suggest is if your photos in a single place should be somewhat consistent, right? So you don't want to have a kind of look on your website and then half of your photos are super bright and vibrant and then some of them are like grayed out and dull and then some of them are cool. It's confusing. So try to kind of pick a color style and stick with it. And that doesn't mean that you couldn't have like a lesson where it was just different style, but within a particular thing, try to keep your edits somewhat consistent. All right. And so clarity is going to, again, focus on those lines, right? So any sort of dark shapes, it's going to really bump those and accentuate those dark shapes. Less clarity is kind of going to blur those areas. And so if you bring it down, it gets a little bit kind of soft and faded almost. So this is a nice way to kind of make your own filter if you wanted to kind of give it this filter effect and have this kind of somewhat grainy, blurry appearance to it. You could certainly do that yourself. Or you could go, super clear and crisp, and all these edges get extra sharp, and you can see every blade of grass. And again, it's totally up to you. This is very stylistic. I'm going to leave a little bit of extra clarity in mine just to really bump those cows in the front. And then vignette is the last step. And so vignette gives you an option to kind of fade out the edges of your image. And you can fade it to dark or you can fade it to light. So going to the left, we'll fade the outer edges to white. And going to the right, we'll fade the outer edges to dark. And you want to be a little bit careful with these because they can start to look really a bit strange. The whole idea of a vignette is that it draws your eye to the subject of the image. However, because again, Windows is not a super professional photo editor, you can't really choose the focal point. So it just does this generic kind of center focal point for the kind of the area that doesn't fade, and everything else around it gets that kind of faded look to it. So if you want to do it, you need to think about the situation. If you're in a dark jungle and the background is kind of like thick with leaves, you can get away with doing a very thick vignette. But here in the open field, it like feels wrong because it's like, wait a second, I'm out in the open. Why is there a shadow on the grass here and here? And why is the distance like shadowy here and here? It just doesn't work at this level. If we did the same vignette on a jungle scene with like a monkey in the middle of the picture that's covered in sunlight, you probably wouldn't notice the faded dark edges as much because it would kind of make sense. So just be careful with your vignette and use it in places that make sense and that work. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give it a small vignette like this to the dark side, but not enough that you really start to see those edges, right? So just something like that. And it's basically just darkening the corners in the distance so that you feel more like the subject in the center is well lit. So I'm going to put it on 60 here, and that's pretty, I'm liking that right now. Okay. So the next thing you can do, I forgot to mention, if you double click on the image, it zooms in, and you can click and move to drag around, or you can go full screen. You can fit it to window rather by clicking there, and you also have these little plus and minus things. And of course, you can also hold Control on your keyboard and use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. So I forgot to mention the navigation. So double click will like zoom all the way in, which will let you get a good look at your edits and see how they're looking for the color and the style and everything. So that's a really quick way to like check, all right, what am I doing to my image here? But if you want to be more subtle, you can hold Control and the mouse wheel, or you can click these buttons here. And you can always just drag it around by clicking and dragging. This all works with touch as well. All right. So once I'm done, I have two options to save this. So the first is the default one, which is save a copy. And as you might expect, this is going to pop open with that message that says saving a copy. And it's just going to create a second image. And you can see here, what it's done is it's taken the original file name and just put a number 2 in parentheses after the file name. So that's the first option. The second option is to just save it as the original. And so if I was to save it over the original, so I'm just going to kind of quickly do this again as if we were starting from the beginning. You'll notice the second you click save it, it closes that save and it closes your edit. So that's basically saying, yep, I'm done. So let's go ahead and make this a portrait. We'll drag this over here. We'll go to adjustments, open this up. I'm just kind of going to do this pretty quickly. There we go. Something like that. And so the other option that you have is instead of clicking save a copy, you can select this little down drop arrow and click save. And what that will do is save your work and replace the original image. Now, here's the thing. I am a strong believer of not saving stuff that you don't need. It wastes space on your computer, and it's just kind of a bad practice, and you're probably just never gonna go use it again. So if you have a bunch of photos and unedited, they're not very good, then what's the point of keeping the unedited version? You may as well just edit them and get rid of the original ones and keep the ones that have been edited. Now, if you're doing cropping, if you're deleting parts of the image, maybe I would suggest saving a copy, because maybe you decide one day, hey, man, I wish I had the landscape version of this cow, but I already cut off the landscape when I cropped it, and now I don't have the original saved anymore. In that case, you might want to keep it. If you're doing something like a crop, or cropping to a square, or cropping to a different layout, whether it's portrait or landscape, in those situations, I would probably save a copy. But in all other situations where you're just making the picture look better and you're not adjusting the actual crop at all, keep the image that looks better and don't worry about the color changes, because you probably don't need those original versions anyways. Again, one of the advantages of professional color editing programs and photo editing programs like Lightroom is that they store the changes in their system. So you can actually go through and make all these edits, and you haven't actually created any new files until you're ready to export. And then you can export your whole library with all of the changes that you've made when you're ready, and it doesn't actually affect the original images. But again, for people in our profession, it might be unnecessary. This is a faster, easier, and more accessible way to quickly make your photos look a little bit better for everybody. So if you do click save, just be careful, because it will replace your original image. So I've just clicked save, the edits now go away, and if I close this, what you'll see is my original image is gone. I only have my, it's the same file name, there's the original image, and I've lost it. The original image is no more. So here's the one that I created that was a copy, so it gets this number, and saving over the original image does this. So that's the photo editing trick, and I'll just very quickly pick a couple other of these ones to do, and I'll just kind of talk my way through my edits so you can kind of follow along. So also note, from this opening page, there's a few other things that you can do actually that I should discuss first. So first of all, you have the crop and rotate function right up here. So if you just want to rotate the image, you don't even have to go into any edits, and that's automatically saved. The crop does require a save. If you open that, it's actually going to open the editing thing anyways. So sometimes it's a faster way to get to the editing page than coming over here, clicking 2 times, right, to get here. Or you could just click 1 time and you're right there. So it's a little trick to get into the editing page a little bit faster. There's another very useful trick that you can do from this home page that you cannot do once you go into the edit, and that is these little dots over here. So if you select these little dots over here, an option that you have is resize. All right. When you click resize, it's going to give you these possible options. So you've got small, medium, large, and then define custom dimensions. It'll also give you an estimate of the current file size and the size it'll be after you resize it to various images. And this is extremely useful if you are putting pictures on your website, because you don't want to upload 15 megapixel images to your website. You want to reduce those down to 1 megapixel or half a megapixel, or 2 megapixels at the most. If you have huge images on your website, it's going to take forever to load. Google also is going to rank your website lower if you have huge images that take forever to load on your website. So if you want to make it better optimized for searches, you want to keep your images as small as possible. And this is a really fast way to do it. It's not the best way to do it. You could use Photoshop or another program like that to get it exactly the size that you want. But this way is at least very quick and easy to do. And if you put the custom image size in here, you can literally just adjust the width and the height and keep this checked so that it will stay the same aspect ratio. So if I wanted it to be a maximum of 500 pixels high, or something like that, the other dimension will automatically adjust to maintain. And then here you can adjust the quality. And so this is, if it's going to be a small image, you can put it onto 40% low quality and set it to 250 pixels or something, and now you have a very small image that's going to be incredibly good for online viewing. It'll load very quickly, and so just keep your eye on the file size estimate when you're in this menu here, because it's an approximation. And just note that when you do this, it is going to be saving a copy, right? So it's going to pop up with this window. It's going to ask you where do you want it to go. And notice it does not change the file name by default, right? So if I click save, it's actually going to be saving over my original one. So I would do something like medium size. That way I know, okay, this one has been resized to medium, right? And so now we can actually double check that we have the original photo and the original photo medium. So here's the original, and here's the medium. And as you can see, you can barely see any difference. It's virtually indistinguishable on this screen. So you can get away with making images a lot smaller. And let's just double check, hold the mouse over it to see the size. So this is 300 kilobytes compared to almost 6 megabytes. So it's a huge difference. And still it's enough to have shrunk the file size substantially. This is still probably too large for most websites. You really want to be under 100 kilobytes, closer to 50 or 40. But for a much smaller image that still retains like 90% of the look, using that medium preset is probably going to be fine for most people. So that's one thing that you can do straight from this thing, is go and resize your image. While we're here, let's just also quickly look through the settings menu for the Photos app. So one thing that you should do is make sure that linked duplicates is turned on. So what that means is that exact duplicates files are going to be shown as a single file. And so if you are taking photos with a professional camera that has RAW settings, and some smartphones nowadays also have the ability to shoot in RAW, those images will come in together. So usually they're saved side by side, one as a JPEG, one as a RAW. But if you keep this linked duplicates turned on, then they will automatically come in together, and so you can kind of edit them together, which is great. Delete confirmation dialog is usually pretty good. If you're like, if you accidentally hit delete on your keyboard, that's kind of a good option to keep on. I don't use the people function on Windows, so you can leave that off. For mouse wheel, I have the view next or previous icon, but you can also set it to zoom in and out. Again, I don't need that, because if you hold control, it converts to zoom. And then, these albums, I don't really use this, but it does actually generate albums based on when you've taken the photos and when you've uploaded them. The video hardware accelerator is only if you have a graphics card, and it's not that important for photo editing. And that's pretty much it. And the only other thing is, like, you can add folders of photos to include in the standard photos collection, right? So actually, this is just the pop-up photo viewer. But if you click see all photos, you've got this kind of like, strange Windows badly designed user interface that shows photos, and there's like a timeline here, and you can organize it differently. But to be honest, I never use this, and I don't use this because I already have all of my photos nicely organized inside our photo library. So within our photo library, I have a folder system that has all of our photos nicely organized. All right. So we'll go back to our photos thing there. And yeah, let's try another photo. Let's try something with people in it. So this is a black and white photo. And we'll just go to edit and adjustments, and we'll pop those two things open. And let's make this something like super dramatic, right? So let's do, high contrast on this one. We'll do pretty high exposure, but we'll take the highlights down. We'll bring the shadows down as well. We're going really dramatic with this one. Color isn't going to matter, right? Because this is a black and white photo. Warmth, I'm going to give it this kind of old-fashioned look by giving it this subtle warm glow. Clarity is going to take those blacks and really crush them to make them super black, which I might do to get this very dramatic effect. And in this case, I might get away with a lighter vignette. No, let's go for a darker vignette. Somewhere around there. And I'm just going to save over the original because I don't need the original anymore. And so you'll see it gives you a brief preview of the original version, and then it shows you your final version in the end. And so that's it. You know, it's a few seconds once you get fast at this. So here's a kind of photo of some bees. Looks like the giant Asian honeybee. And so within a few seconds, I can very quickly turn this into a much more interesting looking photo. So my style is typically to kind of mess around with it until I find a look that I like, right? So in this case, I'm going to do a heavy vignette that brings your attention towards the bees. I'm going to increase the let's decrease the highlights a bit more and increase the shadows a bit, somewhere around there, and really bump those colors up. And there we go. And I'll just show you, you also have this option to undo all. And so you'll have this, this option will be on all your edits. And so you can kind of look back and forth. So this is undo all and redo all. So I've taken the photo in just a few seconds from this, which is fine, just a little boring, to this, which is super dramatic, right? And it makes a difference. You know, when somebody's looking through a catalog or looking at a graphic, it makes a difference whether they're seeing a nice, pretty photo or not. So I'm going to save that. And I'm just going to use right to go on the keyboard to the next photo. And here we've got an exterior shot. This one has some challenging lighting issues that I might not be able to save. But you'll look at the sky and it's really exposed. So I'm going to take my highlights down. And you can see already we've got some cloud data. You can see there's definitely something saved there. But now it all looks pixely. So it doesn't really look very nice. So I might try taking the exposure down. Shadows can come up. This is going to make the image look a little bit flatter, almost like two-dimensional. The contrast can come down as well, but the light can go high. The warmth can go up a little bit. The clarity can go up a bit. The vignette can go up a bit. And the color even more. And again, I'm just kind of messing with the sliders until I find a look that I like. And so there we got something of a blue. Might try, like if I, no. See, in professional video editing software, you'd be able to, or photo editing software, you'd be able to kind of tell just the sky to be a little bit more blue. But to be honest, it's not really worth the time and energy. Like, this is fine. This is good enough, again, for most situations in which I'll need a photo. This is more than good enough. So just from a few seconds of work, I've taken it from this, which is overexposed up here and too dark over here, to this, which is a little bit more dramatic and has a nicer, flatter color look to it. So it's that fast to edit these photos. All right, we'll do one more. Let's do the give me another animal. Let's do the giant ibis at ACCB. So we'll go adjustments, light, we'll open these things, and we'll just mess around with it until we get it to a nice look. Pop those colors. Now the tint I can mess around with a bit here to either make it look more green or more red. I think I might give it a little bit of a green tinge and a tiny bit of warmth. I'm going to pop that clarity so that his feathers really stick out nicely. And for the vignette, I'm going to add a little bit of lighter vignette, actually. And let's bring this contrast up and the lighting up a bit. That's looking pretty dramatic. So this is the shadow, so it's just looking at what it's doing to his tail. So just by moving them around, you kind of can help yourself get a better look at various parts of the picture. And again, double click to pop in and check your work. So that was the original, this is the new. That was the original, this is the new. This is kind of the way I go about doing my photo edits, but of course everybody's going to have their own preference of what looks nice and what looks good. I'm actually also going to crop this one a bit. I realized that there's too much empty space behind him. I think it'll look nicer if it's just more of the bird on the left side. Something like that. And yeah, I'm going to save that. So there's the original and there's the new. So that's looking nice. So that's going to wrap up our little quick video on photo editing and photography, and I hope this really helps you guys just understand how easy it is to make things look good enough. And again, just as a reminder, nothing, we're not professional photographers and we don't need to be. It's just a matter of kind of having a somewhat of a good eye to catch nice moments where you can kind of see a lot of different things going on at the same time, or having a nice angle and positioning of the animals on your screen. But then, you've taken it with your phone, or you took it in the field and it's a bit, the color's not quite right. No problem. You don't need to be a professional photo editor to fix it and make it look a little bit better. So this is a very, very easy and quick way of improving the look and color of your photos to make it look a little bit more professional, and most importantly, attractive to your audience, right? And again, as I've mentioned many times, that's what this is all about. This is about convincing your audience, your students, whoever it is that you're working with or communicating to be more engaged with what you're talking about or what you're presenting by using visual media, right? By using those nice, attractive images and videos to convey your message or showcase some of your work. And if you showcase your work and it doesn't look very professional and it looks old or it looks, grayed out and you can't really see what's going on, well, that's the message people will take away from it. So a little bit of effort, just a few minutes of work, and you can make your photos look much better than how they come out of the camera. All right, I hope you guys learned something there, and I'll catch you guys in the next one where we're going to talk about the same trick but using a video editing tool built into Windows. All right, bye-bye.